The morning started like any other. The sun had barely begun to warm the streets, and the air carried the quiet hum of a town slowly waking up. People moved about their routine without much thought. The familiar rhythm of life giving comfort to those who watched and followed it. In the middle of all this, she walked with a calmness that seemed almost invisible, a figure so ordinary that few paid her any mind. She was not someone who demanded attention or stood out with flashy clothes or loud words. Instead, she moved quietly, unnoticed by most. A background note in the symphony of the town, her day began with small tasks, the kind of things anyone could do. She helped with errands, tidied up spaces, and made small gestures that usually went unnoticed. People around her hardly remembered her name, and if they did, it was only in passing. But in her own quiet way, she carried a sense of purpose that was invisible to the world. She believed in doing what needed to be done, even if no one clapped for it or even noticed it. It was a life built on simplicity, on honesty, on giving without expecting praise. That morning, a simple request arrived. Nothing big, nothing extraordinary, just a small favor asked by someone who barely knew her. It was the kind of thing that most would ignore or pass off to someone else. It was easy, routine, and ordinary, yet it carried with it a weight that no one could see. She accepted it without hesitation, nodding with a quiet smile that seemed to say, "I can handle this." Her acceptance did not draw attention. It did not create a stir. To the people who watched, it was just another small act in a world full of small acts. As she prepared to fulfill the request, the environment around her remained casual. People carried on with their own lives, occasionally glancing in her direction, but quickly turning away. No one expected anything remarkable. No one imagined that this simple request could become the center of attention. There was a comfort in that ignorance, a lack of expectation that made the moment feel ordinary. The streets were busy, the chatter constant, the routines unbroken. In the midst of all this, she moved with quiet focus, the kind of focus that comes from years of unnoticed practice. From a lifetime of preparing in ways that no one could see, she approached the task with patience. Each step was deliberate but unremarkable to anyone watching. Her hands moved with care, her eyes followed the process with attention, yet there was nothing about her demeanor that suggested she was anything more than anyone else. People nearby went about their conversations, some laughing, some complaining, completely unaware that something unusual was about to unfold. Even the person who had asked the favor did not expect much, simply satisfied that someone had agreed to help. It was a moment where appearances mattered more than reality, and reality was quietly waiting in the wings. She had been here before. In countless moments like this, performing small acts while the world assumed nothing. She had learned to move through life without seeking approval, to work without applause, to care without acknowledgement. There was a rhythm to her movements, a silent confidence that had been built in private, away from the eyes of those who judged too quickly. And now, as she stood on the brink of fulfilling a request that seemed insignificant to everyone else, that private confidence was ready to make itself known in a way that no one expected. People began to notice her in glimpses, small, unintentional glances that carried curiosity rather than attention. Some wondered why she moved with such care, why her hands seemed so precise, why her eyes were fixed on the task as if it mattered more than it should. A few whispered to each other, questioning what she was doing. But the answers were simple and ordinary. She was completing a request. There was nothing special on the surface, nothing that suggested the extraordinary. And yet, there was something in the way she carried herself that made those few moments stretch longer, made the mundane feel slightly different, slightly heavier with anticipation. The request itself was simple. It required focus, patience, and skill. Yet it was not the kind of skill anyone expected her to have. It was the sort of thing that could be completed by anyone with average ability, and in fact, most people would have done it in a hasty, careless way. But she did not rush. She did not make a sound. Each movement was careful, deliberate, measured. She seemed to understand the task in a way that went beyond instructions, as if she could see the result in her mind long before it existed in the physical world. There was a quiet mastery in her approach, invisible to the untrained eye, noticed by the world that moved around her in a blur of ordinary life. As she worked, she became absorbed in the moment. The surroundings faded away, the chatter dimmed. And even the person who had asked the favor began to notice a shift in the atmosphere. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a change in the energy that could not be explained with words. Something in the way she handled the task, the precision of her actions, the care in her touch, began to draw attention without effort. People paused in their conversations, looked in her direction, and then looked away, unsure why they were curious. The ordinary was transforming, slowly, quietly, without fanfare. She did not seek attention. She did not smile, did not boast, did not perform. Her focus was entirely on the task, her hands moving with a fluidity that seemed natural yet extraordinary. The object of the request, which had seemed simple, was taking shape in her hands in a way that no one had expected. The curves, the angles, the alignment, all of it seemed to obey her intent. Those watching, even without realizing it, felt a growing sense of anticipation. A silent question forming in their minds: could this ordinary person be more than she seems? Minutes passed, but they felt different to those who observed. Time seemed to stretch, elongated by curiosity and subtle admiration. People stopped what they were doing, some leaning forward slightly, trying to catch a better glimpse without drawing attention. There was a collective shift, a recognition that something unusual was happening, even though no one could put it into words. It was a tension that carried both excitement and disbelief, a quiet suspense that had no sound but could be felt in the chest. Throughout it all, she remained calm. There was no hint of pride, no flicker of anxiety. She existed fully in the present, her mind and body synchronized in a way that made everything she touched precise, deliberate, and alive. The ordinary request was no longer ordinary. It had become a canvas on which her hidden ability began to appear. Yet to her, it was simply completing the task. Nothing more, nothing less. The contrast between her inner understanding and the outer perception created a tension that everyone around her felt, a growing curiosity that would soon turn into awe. Even as people began to notice, they still underestimated her. They expected a minor success, a small, neat completion of the request. Perhaps they expected it to be acceptable, adequate, enough to satisfy the person who asked. What they did not expect was the level of care, the quiet skill, the subtle brilliance that seemed to manifest without effort. She moved in silence, letting the task speak for itself, letting the process unfold naturally, without forcing attention or recognition. And in that silence, something extraordinary began to emerge. A sense that this moment, which seemed so ordinary, was about to leave a mark. The morning passed slowly, yet each second was rich with anticipation. The people around her started to exchange glances, uncertain and curious. Their previous assumptions were slowly being challenged, but they did not yet understand why. They had thought of her as ordinary, as unremarkable, as someone who would complete the request in a way that was sufficient but not impressive. But the way she worked, the ease with which she handled each movement, the subtle precision, all suggested otherwise. Something unseen, something extraordinary, was quietly revealing itself. She did not speak. She did not explain. She allowed her actions to communicate in a language that everyone could sense, but not articulate. The object of the request transformed under her hands, becoming something more than it was meant to be. The ordinary act became a stage for her hidden talent, a place where skill and dedication silently intersected. Those who were watching could feel it in the air, a tension that pulled at their attention, a quiet energy that made them lean forward without realizing it. By the time the task was nearly complete, the town's ordinary morning had shifted in tone. Conversations slowed. Movements paused. Eyes followed her hands, tracing each motion as if trying to understand how something so simple could become so remarkable. The anticipation had grown into a quiet awe, a sense that this moment, this unassuming act, was unlike anything anyone had expected. The ordinary world had been interrupted by something extraordinary, not with fanfare or spectacle, but with quiet, deliberate action. And still, she remained unaware of the full effect. She focused only on the task, moving naturally, letting her skill manifest without thought or expectation. The The people around her had begun to realize that what they assumed was ordinary had been underestimated. The quiet background figure, the unnoticed helper, had started to command attention in the most subtle, human way possible. The stage was set, the tension ready to break. And the simple request that had seemed so insignificant was now a doorway to something unforgettable. By the end of that morning, the task was complete. It was neat, precise, and carried an elegance that no one had anticipated. The people who had doubted or ignored her paused, staring in quiet astonishment. They realized slowly that they had witnessed more than just a simple act. They had seen a glimpse of something hidden, a talent that had lived quietly and waited patiently for its moment. And though she remained calm, as if nothing had changed, the world around her had shifted. The ordinary had become extraordinary. No one would forget how it had happened. After the initial moment had passed, the quiet awe that lingered in the air began to shift into doubt and questions. People who had watched her closely now whispered among themselves, unsure what to think. Some still believed it had been a simple task, nothing remarkable, just a careful hand completing a basic request. Others, however, could not shake the feeling that there was more to her than they realized. It was a mix of curiosity and skepticism, a tension that hung over the scene like a delicate cloud. She moved calmly, carrying on as though nothing had changed. Her focus remained entirely on what she was doing. And she did not notice or, perhaps chose not to notice the curious glances and hushed murmurs around her. To her, it was just another task, one among many she had quietly taken on over the years. But the people who had asked for the favor, and those who had stopped to watch, were beginning to realize that her quiet confidence was unlike anything they had expected. A few voices began to rise, though still soft enough not to disturb the calm of the morning. "Are you sure she knows what she's doing?" Someone asked, an edge of doubt in their tone. Another responded quietly, "It looks simple, but I don't know. There's something unusual about the way she moves." Even among the doubters, there was a reluctant recognition that this person might be capable of more than they had assumed. The person who had initially made the request felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Relief because she was handling it so well. Anxiety because no one had anticipated that it could turn out in such an unexpectedly skillful way. Watching her, they realized that perhaps they had underestimated the quiet confidence that came with years of unnoticed practice. They had asked for something small, expecting small results. And yet they were now faced with a growing sense that ordinary expectations might no longer apply, as she continued. The surrounding crowd became more aware of their own assumptions. They began to question their judgments. How often had they overlooked someone quietly capable because appearances suggested otherwise? They realized that the world often measures worth by visibility, by loudness, by outward display, and not by the careful skill that often hides in plain sight. The more she worked, the more these thoughts crept into the minds of those watching. They could not explain it fully, but they felt the weight of their misjudgment. A few people tried to intervene, offering suggestions or small hints on how the task might be easier, faster, or more efficient. "Why not do it this way?" they asked, their voices tinged with both helpfulness and subtle doubt. She nodded politely, but did not change her method. She understood the task on her own terms, and her movements reflected an internal logic that others could not immediately grasp. Her patience and quiet precision were proof that she had done this before, not necessarily this exact task, but tasks of similar nature that required focus, care, and hidden skill. The whispers of doubt gradually gave way to an unusual mix of anticipation and tension. People around her stopped talking, sensing that the moment was about to unfold in ways that could not be predicted. Their doubt was not completely gone, but it had shifted into a question of whether they had misjudged her all along. Even those who had been skeptical could not look away. Something about her calm and deliberate approach was drawing attention, but it was subtle, almost unintentional. It was a natural magnetism that came from quiet competence rather than showmanship inside her. She felt the familiar rhythm of focus. She had spent years learning, practicing, and refining her abilities without anyone noticing. This had become second nature to her, a way of moving through the world with skill, patience, and quiet confidence. It was not about proving anything. It was about living according to her own standards. And now, without effort, without announcement, that hidden competence was becoming visible to those who had never really paid attention. Some began to whisper among themselves, trying to rationalize what they were seeing. "It's just luck," one person said quietly. "She's careful, yes, but I think it's just a coincidence that it's working out so perfectly." Others shook their heads, still unsure, but feeling a growing sense of wonder. They had underestimated her, and now the realization was creeping in, slowly and reluctantly. The contrast between their expectations and reality was stark, creating a mix of disbelief and intrigue that hung in the air. She paid no attention to their doubts. She worked in a rhythm that was entirely her own, guided by experience and instinct. Her hands moved smoothly. Her eyes followed each movement with quiet precision, and her mind remained calm, entirely absorbed in the task at hand. Every motion was deliberate, every step measured. The ordinary request had become a stage for something more, though she did not see it as performance. It was simply a matter of doing what she knew she could do. The people watching began to shift subtly in their behavior. Some leaned closer, trying to catch a better view without drawing attention to themselves. Others straightened in their seats, holding their breath as they watched her hands move with careful skill. Even those who had been critical moments before now felt a sense of anticipation. The ordinary had become interesting, and interest had grown into quiet suspense. They did not know what would happen next, but they could sense that they were about to witness something unusual. Her calmness, in contrast, was absolute. There was no trace of nervousness, no hint of uncertainty. She moved as though she had done this countless times before, yet each motion was fresh, precise, and alive. She did not need acknowledgement or applause. The satisfaction of completing the task to her own standard was enough. This inner confidence, invisible to the outside world until now, began to shine through in subtle ways that drew attention even without intention. As the task progressed, the crowd's skepticism began to fade slowly. Small, unspoken realizations crept into their minds. Perhaps they had judged too quickly. Perhaps they had overlooked someone quietly capable. Perhaps the world did not always reveal its best moments in loud, visible ways. Their doubt had begun to transform into curiosity, the first step toward recognition. They were still unsure what the outcome would be, but they were now fully invested in watching, waiting for the reveal that was quietly building. She noticed none of this. Her attention remained on the task, each step requiring care, patience, and skill. She understood the request deeply, not just as a surface task, but as something that could be done in a way that felt right to her. Her hands, eyes, and mind worked in harmony. A silent dance that made even the simplest actions seem purposeful and significant. The ordinary request was becoming something more, not because she wanted to impress, but because that was her natural way of doing things. Occasionally, someone would whisper again, still trying to rationalize what they were seeing. "Maybe she's exaggerating the effort," one said. "It doesn't seem that hard." But those words were already contradicted by what they observed. Every careful movement, every patient adjustment, every tiny correction was evidence of skill they had not expected. Slowly, doubt turned to acknowledgement. They could see that she was not ordinary, even if they could not yet describe why. The tension in the air continued to build. The people who had doubted her were now paying full attention, their minds racing to understand what they had missed. Those who had quietly admired her before now felt a deeper sense of respect. And she, calm and focused, continued to work, unaware of the impact her quiet competence was having. Her skill was not flashy or loud, but it was undeniable. The ordinary world around her had shifted, and those who had assumed she was nothing remarkable were beginning to realize that their assumptions had been flawed. Time seemed to stretch. Each second waited with anticipation. The task, simple in nature, had become a slow reveal of her hidden talent. The people around her began to sense that this was not just about completing a request. It was about seeing someone quietly extraordinary, someone whose abilities had gone unnoticed for too long. Their doubt had transformed into a tentative respect, the first sign that she was breaking through the invisible walls that often separate ordinary perception from hidden reality, she remained unaware of the attention and speculation. Her focus was singular, her movements precise, and her intent clear. Every action was deliberate, yet natural. The ordinary request was unfolding in a way that no one could have predicted. And yet to her, it was simply another task, handled in her own steady, confident manner. The quiet mastery she displayed was beginning to alter the perception of those who watched. Even if they did not fully understand how or why, by the end of the morning, the task was still in progress, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Doubt had transformed into curiosity, skepticism had become attention. An ordinary expectation had shifted into anticipation. The people around her could now sense that something remarkable was quietly unfolding, even if they could not yet see the final result. And through it all, she moved with the same calm, patient precision that had carried her through countless unnoticed moments, unaware that the world around her was beginning to recognize what had always been there. The moment had come when the ordinary began to shift into something extraordinary. At first, it was almost imperceptible, a subtle change in the way she moved, a rhythm in her hands that suggested more than careful attention. The people around her began to notice, leaning forward slightly, holding their breath as if even the smallest motion might reveal the secret they could not yet name. Their eyes widened as her quiet skill began to show itself, the hidden mastery that had remained invisible until now. She moved with a confidence that seemed effortless. Each action, though simple to an untrained observer, carried a grace and precision that spoke of years of unseen practice. The subtle ways she adjusted, corrected, and refined the task made it clear that she was not just following instructions. She was interpreting them, shaping them, giving them life in a way that had never been anticipated. It was no longer just about completing a request. It was about bringing something hidden into view, something extraordinary that had quietly existed all along. The audience, initially skeptical, began to shift in their perception. A few gasped softly. Others exchanged looks of disbelief. The whispers that had been cautious and tentative now carried excitement. "How is she doing that?" One person murmured. "It looks impossible," another added, their voice barely audible but filled with wonder. They had expected simplicity, and what they were witnessing was far beyond their imagination. The quiet woman they had ignored and underestimated was suddenly the center of attention. Her focus remained undisturbed. She did not glance up, did not smile, did not seek approval. She simply moved, fully absorbed in the task, letting her ability express itself naturally. Every motion seemed intentional, yet effortless. Every correction a demonstration of deep understanding. She had not planned to amaze anyone. Her goal had always been simply to do what she knew she could do. And yet that was more than enough to captivate everyone who watched. The simple request had become a revelation. The crowd, who had once doubted her, now watched in quiet awe. They realized that skill and talent often lie hidden, unnoticed, until the right moment calls them forward. She had not shouted, she had not performed. She had simply done what she was capable of, and in doing so, revealed a depth that no one had suspected. It was a lesson in patience, humility, and the quiet power of mastery. Every movement she made seemed to carry weight, though there was no physical heaviness. It was the weight of experience, of focus, of understanding that only comes with dedication over time. The people watching felt it intuitively, though they could not describe it. Their skepticism melted into amazement, their doubt into admiration. They had underestimated her, and in the process they had witnessed something rare and beautiful. She did not speak. Words would have been unnecessary, and perhaps even intrusive. The task itself was becoming a language, one that communicated far more than words could. Each careful motion, each subtle adjustment, was a sentence in this unspoken dialogue between her and the world. The observers felt themselves drawn into it, caught in the silent narrative unfolding before their eyes. The ordinary world had been transformed into a stage for something extraordinary. Some of those watching began to recognize the familiar rhythm of dedication and practice in her movements. They could see that this was not the result of chance or luck. Her skill was deliberate, honed over time. built in private moments where no one could see, moments where she had labored in silence, learning to perfect each gesture without applause or recognition. That realization deepened their admiration, for they understood that true talent often grows quietly, hidden from view. Waiting for the right moment to emerge, the shift in perception was not instantaneous, but it was powerful. People who had been skeptical moments before now leaned closer, their eyes fixed on her hands as they moved with precision and grace. They whispered to each other, sharing their astonishment, trying to make sense of what they saw. "I never thought she could do that," one person admitted. "She's amazing," another said, their voice filled with awe. The crowd's energy had changed, replaced by a mixture of respect, curiosity, and amazement. She remained unaware of the full impact. Her focus was on the task, on each careful step, on each subtle decision. The world around her seemed to fade, leaving only her and the unfolding work. This was her element, the place where skill and patience met, where ordinary requests became opportunities for quiet brilliance. The observers could only watch, feeling the tension and wonder build as the moment continued to unfold. There was a subtle beauty in the way she worked. The simplicity of the task allowed her talent to shine without distraction. There were no dramatic gestures, no flashy movements, just a seamless combination of precision, focus, and grace. It was mesmerizing to watch, even for those who did not understand the mechanics of what she was doing. The ordinary had been transformed into something extraordinary simply by the presence of her skill and dedication. As she continued, the anticipation grew. People leaned in, held their breath, and watched intently. They could sense that the moment was approaching a climax, though they could not yet predict what form it would take. Every motion she made seemed to build toward something, a quiet crescendo of skill and confidence that had been invisible until now. The air was thick with expectation, shared sense among all who observed that they were witnessing something remarkable. Her calmness and focus contrasted with the growing energy of the crowd. She moved steadily, with no haste, no distraction. The precision of her hands, the subtle corrections, the thoughtful adjustments, all of it created a sense of rhythm, a flow that captivated those around her. They could not take their eyes off her, even if they wanted to. The ordinary request had become a window into a world of skill and patience that few had ever seen. Some began to reflect on their own assumptions. They had judged her as ordinary, unnoticed, unremarkable. And yet here she was, demonstrating a depth of talent that could not be denied. The lesson was clear. Appearances could be misleading. True skill often resides in quiet. Unassuming individuals who practice and perfect their craft away from the eyes of the world. Their admiration grew, tempered with humility, as they realized how easily they had underestimated someone capable of so much. She made a small adjustment, and the change was immediate. The task, which had already been impressive, now took on a new dimension. The observers gasped softly, sensing that the ordinary was now fully transformed. Each motion carried intention and understanding, a blend of natural talent and honed skill. The simple request had become a stage, and she was the performer, though she had never intended to perform. It was the quiet brilliance of someone who knew their abilities and allowed them to manifest without showmanship. The atmosphere around her had shifted completely. There was no chatter, no distraction, only quiet attention. People were captivated, drawn in by the subtle beauty of her movements. The ordinary had become extraordinary not through noise or spectacle, but through the quiet revelation of hidden talent. Those watching could not look away, and even their doubts had been replaced by awe. As the task neared completion, the crowd felt a growing sense of wonder. They had expected simplicity, and instead they were witnessing mastery. Their assumptions had been challenged, their skepticism replaced by admiration. The ordinary woman they had overlooked had revealed something extraordinary, and the effect was profound. They realized that true skill could be quiet, humble, and invisible until the right moment. And in that moment, it could astonish everyone. She finished the final motions with calm precision, her focus unwavering to the last second. The result was flawless, a testament to her hidden ability and years of quiet practice. The observers were silent for a moment, absorbing what they had seen, realizing that they had witnessed more than just a simple request being completed. They had seen someone extraordinary reveal themselves through patience, dedication, and skill. It was a moment that would linger in their minds. A reminder that talent often hides where no one expects it, and that the quietest individuals sometimes possess the deepest abilities. The moment had passed, and what remained was a silence heavier than words. People who had gathered, whether intentionally or by chance, could not speak immediately. Their eyes were fixed on her, taking in what they had just witnessed. The ordinary request that had seemed so simple had been transformed into a display of skill and patience that none of them could have anticipated. The impact was profound, and even though the task was complete, the atmosphere carried a weight of astonishment and admiration. Some of the people felt a rush of emotion that caught them by surprise. They had doubted her ability, dismissed her quiet presence, and underestimated her entirely. Now, that doubt had turned into awe, mixed with a twinge of guilt for having misjudged her. They whispered softly to each other, acknowledging their error. But words could not fully capture the feeling that had settled over them. It was a moment that touched something deeper than curiosity or entertainment. It was a recognition of talent, effort, and humility that had gone unnoticed for far too long. She remained calm, as if nothing had changed. There was no sense of triumph, no visible pride, no need for validation. Her focus had always been on the task itself, not on the reaction it might provoke. Yet her calmness only made the impact stronger. The observers realized that her excellence was natural, effortless, and sincere. It was not a performance intended to impress. It was simply the result of dedication, skill, and quiet confidence. And in that realization, they were moved more than they could express. People began to reflect on their own assumptions. How often had they dismissed someone based on appearances or overlooked quiet individuals in favor of those who were louder or more visible? They could see, in the most vivid way, that greatness does not always announce itself. It can reside quietly, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And when it does, it can leave everyone who witnesses it stunned, humbled, and inspired. The lesson was clear. It resonated in their hearts, even as their voices remained hushed. Some observers felt tears rise unexpectedly. It was not sadness, but a profound sense of admiration and emotional connection. They could sense the years of practice, the patience, the quiet effort that had led to this moment. They could see the subtle strength of character, the calm determination, and the unspoken humility that made her talent even more remarkable. Their emotions were a testament to the power of witnessing something genuine, something crafted with care and authenticity. Conversations slowly began to form among the crowd. Though they were soft, cautious, and reverent. "I never imagined she could do that," one person whispered. Another responded, "It's incredible. All those years of quiet work, and it shows in every motion." The tone of the discussion had shifted completely from skepticism to admiration. There was respect now, deep and sincere, for someone who had been underestimated and overlooked. It was a reminder that true talent often exists in places where people do not expect to find it. The person who had requested the favor felt a mix of relief and astonishment. Relief, because the task had been completed flawlessly. Astonishment, because the process had been more beautiful and skillful than anyone could have imagined. They realized that the quiet, unassuming person they had asked for help was far more capable than they had believed. There was a new appreciation, a recognition of the depth of her abilities, and a sense of gratitude for witnessing something extraordinary. Others around them experienced similar feelings. They began to look at her differently, no longer as someone ordinary or easily overlooked, but as someone exceptional in the most unassuming way. The quiet moments, the years of practice, the dedication that had gone unnoticed, all of it came together in this single act, leaving a mark on those who observed it. They could feel it in their hearts, in the subtle shift of their respect and admiration. It was a quiet revolution in perception, one that changed how they would see her forever. Some felt inspired. Seeing someone so skilled and calm, yet entirely unpretentious, sparked a desire to examine their own lives and efforts. They wondered how much potential they might have overlooked in themselves or others. They felt motivated to notice, to appreciate, and to respect talent and effort in ways they had neglected before. Her example was quietly powerful, demonstrating that true skill and excellence do not require loudness or showmanship. They require dedication, patience, and humility. A few people approached her cautiously, unsure if they should speak. Their words were soft, respectful, and filled with genuine curiosity and admiration. "That was incredible," one said. "I never thought such talent could be so quiet and effortless." She nodded politely, smiling faintly but said little. Her actions had spoken far more than words ever could. The acknowledgement was sufficient. The quiet recognition of her skill enough to satisfy the unseen years of practice and dedication she had invested. As the morning continued, the impact of what had occurred lingered. People who had been skeptical now shared stories and reflections among themselves. They discussed how easy it is to misjudge others, how often potential is overlooked, how extraordinary abilities sometimes emerge in the simplest of contexts. They felt fortunate to have witnessed it, and they knew that the memory of this moment would stay with them for a long time. The ordinary world around them seemed richer, more vibrant, and more full of possibility because of what they had seen. Her own experience remained grounded. She was not seeking recognition, nor did she revel in the attention. Her satisfaction came from completing the task in a way that felt true to her abilities and principles. And yet, the effect she had on others was undeniable. She had shifted perceptions, inspired reflection, and left a lasting impression simply by being herself and doing what she did best. It was a subtle, human-centered impact that touched hearts more deeply than spectacle or performance ever could. As people continued to absorb the moment, the quiet admiration grew into a collective sense of respect. The lessons of humility, patience, and dedication were clear. Talent does not always announce itself, but when it emerges, it can leave everyone who witnesses it transformed. They understood in a visceral way that greatness often resides in silence, and that the simplest acts can reveal extraordinary capability. Their awe was not just for the skill they had observed, but for the quiet strength and character that made it possible. Some who had been hesitant or doubtful felt compelled to apologize, if only internally, for underestimating her. They recognized that assumptions and appearances can mislead, and that true excellence may reside where it is least expected. The act of witnessing her skill became a personal lesson, a reminder to approach the world with openness, patience, and respect for what may be hidden beneath the surface. Even as the crowd began to disperse, the memory of what had happened lingered. People spoke softly among themselves, sharing the details, the nuances, and the subtle moments that had left them astonished. The ordinary request, completed with quiet brilliance, had left a lasting mark. It had shown that extraordinary talent can emerge in the simplest of contexts, and that the true measure of skill often lies in dedication, patience, and the calm execution of one's abilities. She continued on with her day, moving quietly through the world as she always had. The people around her, however, could not see her in the same way again. Their perception had shifted, subtly but permanently. They now recognized the hidden depths in someone they had once overlooked, the quiet power that had revealed itself without fanfare or effort, and in that shared realization, there was a sense of wonder, respect, and inspiration that would remain with them long after the moment had passed. The experience became a story, retold in hushed tones. A moment that people remembered not for its spectacle, but for the human truth it revealed, that patience, skill, and quiet confidence can create impact beyond measure, and that ordinary requests can sometimes unveil extraordinary talent in the most unexpected ways. The emotional resonance of that morning stayed with those who witnessed it, reminding them of the value of paying attention, noticing quietly, and appreciating the hidden abilities in the world around them. The morning gradually moved toward its end. Yet the memory of what had unfolded remained fresh in the minds of those who had witnessed it. People began to return to their routines, but they carried a new awareness, subtle shift in perspective that had been sparked by something unexpected. The quiet woman who had completed a simple request with extraordinary skill had changed the way they saw her, and perhaps the way they looked at the world around them. Some paused for a moment. Reflecting on their own assumptions and judgments, they realized that they had underestimated someone simply because she had been quiet, unassuming, and overlooked. They thought they knew what to expect, but she had proven that talent and skill often hide in plain sight. There was a humility in her excellence that inspired them, a gentle reminder that greatness does not always announce itself loudly. The realization left a quiet echo in their hearts, one that they would carry with them for a long time. She, meanwhile, returned to her day with calm and focus, just as she always had. She did not seek attention or recognition. She did not dwell on the astonishment of others. Her satisfaction came from completing the task in a way that reflected her own standards and abilities. To her, the simple request was complete, and that was enough. Yet, the world around her had been transformed, not by noise or performance, but by the quiet revelation of her skill and dedication. People who had doubted her before now regarded her with a deep respect. Conversations among them often circled back to what they had witnessed, replaying each subtle motion, each careful adjustment, each moment of calm mastery. They realized that the ordinary tasks they had once dismissed could reveal extraordinary ability when approached with patience, skill, and quiet confidence. They had learned a lesson in humility and awareness, recognizing that their assumptions had been too narrow, their judgments too quick. The person who had requested the favor felt a new appreciation for her, not just for the result, but for the care and thoughtfulness she had brought to the task. They realized that they had been asking for something simple, yet she had infused it with depth, precision, elegance that none of them could have predicted. Gratitude and admiration mingled in their thoughts, recognition of the value of her hidden talent and her quiet dedication. Other observers felt inspired by what they had seen. They began to reflect on their own efforts and abilities, wondering what potential they or others might be overlooking. The moment had not only revealed her talent, but it also sparked a sense of possibility and motivation in those who watched. It was a subtle but powerful transformation, one that encouraged reflection, appreciation, and the desire to notice the hidden strengths around them. Some approached her to offer kind words, praise, and admiration. She accepted it with a quiet smile, acknowledging their respect, but not allowing it to change her focus or demeanor. Her calm acceptance of their attention only reinforced the impression that her excellence was natural, genuine, and unforced. She had not sought to impress, and that made the impact even more profound. Her actions had spoken louder than any words. Leaving a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed them, the day moved on, but the effect of that morning lingered. People shared their experience with friends and colleagues, recounting the quiet skill and extraordinary talent they had observed. Each retelling carried a sense of wonder and respect, highlighting the power of patience, practice, and humility. The story became a reminder to pay attention, to recognize the hidden abilities in others, and to appreciate the extraordinary in the everyday.